Book 12 of Metaphysics by Aristotle, Chapter 1. Respecting indeed, therefore, the substance of things that are cognizant by the senses, it has been declared what it is in the mode of inquiry adopted by natural philosophers in their theories concerning matter, and subsequently in our own treatise in regard of matter in a condition of energy or activity. Since, however, our present investigation has for its object to ascertain whether besides sensible substances there is in existence a certain substance that is immovable and eternal, or there is not, and on the supposition of the existence of any such, what it is, in the first place we must take a glance at the assertions made by other speculators, in order that, if they happen to make any assertion not after a correct manner, we may not become entangled in the same errors, and that if there subsists any dogma in common between ourselves and them, we may not be indignant with it as a thing peculiarly in opposition to our present design. For it is a thing that we should remain content with, if one should make some statements with more propriety, but others in a way no wise inferior to ourselves. Now, there are two opinions respecting these subjects, for certain philosophers affirm that mathematical entities are substances, such, for example, as numbers and lines, and those things that are kindred to these, and, again, that ideas are existences of this description. Since, however, some speculators constitute these as two distinct genera, I mean both the ideas and the mathematical numbers, and others maintain in opposition that there is one nature of both, and certain other philosophers say that mathematical entities are alone substances, in the first place we must institute an investigation respecting mathematical entities, without annexing to them any other nature, as, for instance, might or might not be the case, according to whether they happen to be ideas or not, and whether these are first principles and substances of entities or not. But as regards mathematical entities, attending to this point merely, whether they possess a subsistence or do not, and if they do, after what mode they subsist. In the next place, after these inquiries, we shall, apart by itself, institute an investigation concerning the ideas themselves, simply considered, and as much for the sake of usage as anything else. For most of the tenets of what relates to these inquiries have been divulged even by exoteric discourses respecting them. Further also, in regard of that particular form of investigation, it is necessary that we encounter a more enlarged philosophic discussion when we come to be engaged in our inquiries as to whether the substances and first principles of entities are numbers and ideas. For, after the investigation relating to ideas, this one remains as a third subject for inquiry. But it is requisite, on the supposition of the existence of mathematical entities, that these should reside either in objects that fall under the notice of the senses, as certain affirm, or that they should involve a subsistence separable from sensibles. And some make a statement in this way. Or, if they are not inherent in either one or the other, they either have no existence at all, or exist in some different manner. Wherefore, the question with us will not be concerning the existence of mathematical entities, but concerning their mode of existence. Chapter 2. That indeed, therefore, it is impossible that these mathematical entities should reside in objects that are cognizant by the senses, and that at the same time the reason assigned for this position is a fictitious one, has been declared also in the Doubts, where we have proved that it is impossible that there should be two solids in the same place at the same time. And further also, it depends on the same course of reasoning, both that other potentialities and natures should reside in sensibles, and that no one of them should possess a separable subsistence. These things, then, have been already declared. But, in addition to these statements, it is evident that it is impossible that any body whatsoever should be divided. For it will be divided according to a superficies, and this according to a line, and a line according to a point. Wherefore, supposing that it is impossible to divide a point, it is also impossible to divide a line. And if it is impossible to divide a line, the case is the same with the other mathematical quantities likewise. What, therefore, is the difference in allowing either that natures of this description should exist, or that these do not exist at all, but that such natures should be found in sensibles? For the same consequence will ensue. For on the supposition of a division of the sensibles, they also will be divided, or they will not be of the nature of sensibles. But the fact is, neither is it possible that such natures should be actually, at least, separated. For if independent of such as are cognizant by the senses, there should exist other solids that are actually in a condition of separation therefrom, and which are antecedent to those that are cognizant by sense, it is evident that it is also necessary that besides surfaces there should exist other surfaces that involve a separable subsistence, and in like manner other points and lines, for this deduction rests upon the same reasoning. And if these points be admitted again, in addition to the surfaces and lines and points of a mathematical solid, there will be different ones subsisting in a separate condition. For incomposite natures are antecedent to those that are composite, and if antecedent to sensibles, there exist bodies which do not fall under the notice of the senses. By the same reasoning, those very surfaces which subsist essentially will likewise be antecedent to those surfaces that are to be found in immovable solids. Wherefore, those surfaces and lines are different from those which at the same time are inherent in separated solids. For the latter indeed are capable of consubsistence with mathematical solids, but the former are antecedent to mathematical solids. Again, therefore, there will be lines belonging to these surfaces prior to which there will needs be different lines and points for the same reason. And of those points contained in the lines that have an antecedent subsistence, to those cognizant by sense, there will be other prior points to which there will no longer belong different ones that have this prior subsistence. Wherefore also, such an accumulation as the foregoing would be absurd. For it happens that independent of such as fall under the notice of the senses, there subsist single solids, no doubt. Yet that there are 3 ranks of surfaces beside those that are cognizant by the senses, and that one of these subsists beside those that are sensible, and that the second resides in mathematical solids, and that the third subsists beside those sensibles that are inherent in these, and that there exists a 4-fold classification of lines, and that there are 5 ranks of points. Wherefore, let me ask, respecting which of these will the mathematical sciences be conversant? For undoubtedly they are not conversant respecting the surfaces and lines and points that are resident in an immovable solid. For a science is always conversant about subjects that involve a priority of subsistence. And the same reasoning holds good respecting numbers also. For beside each of the points will there exist other monads, and beside each of the entities that fall under the notice of sense, next in order will subsist those that are objects of perception for the mind. Wherefore, there will exist infinite genera of mathematical numbers. Further, how is it possible that we should decide the questions of controversy which we have taken a review of in the doubts enumerated above? For the objects about which astronomy is conversant will in like manner be different from those that are cognizant by sense, and this will be the case too with those particulars about which geometry is concerned. But let me ask the question how it is possible that heaven and the parts thereof subsist, or any other thing whatsoever that involves motion. And the case stands the same in regard of those objects that pertain unto optics and harmonics. For there will exist both voice and a power of vision in addition to the things that fall beneath the notice of our senses, and to singulars. Wherefore it is evident that there will be in existence both other senses and other objects of the senses. For why, may I ask, should these exist rather than those? If, however, these do exist, there will also be in existence other animals, if the truth be that also there are other senses. Further, are some things described by the mathematicians as universal in addition to these substances. Therefore, will this also constitute a certain other separated substance, intermediate between both ideas and media, and which will be neither number, nor points, nor magnitude, nor duration. But if this is impossible, it is evident that it is impossible that those natures also should be separated from sensibles. Now, the short of the matter is this, that the very contrary takes place both to what is in fact true and habitually supposed to be true, if one will in this way seek to establish the existence of mathematical entities as certain natures possessed of a separated subsistence. For it is necessary, from the fact of the subsistence of these in this manner, that they should be antecedent to magnitudes that are cognizant by the senses, when yet in reality they are subsequent to them. For an imperfect magnitude is prior in generation, but subsequent in substance, in the same way as what is inanimate is prior to that which is animated. Further, in what way also at all will these mathematical magnitudes be one? And when will this be the case? For the things, of course, that are here reside in the soul, or a portion of the soul, or in something else that is endowed with reason. And if this be not the case, many things are exposed to dissolution. But now, what is the cause of those things which are divisible and pertaining to quantity being one, and remaining in conjunction with one another as such? Further, do generations make this evident? For in the first place, no doubt, such make a transition into what pertains unto length, in the next place into what pertains unto breadth, and lastly into what relates to depth, and has reached an end. If, therefore, that which is subsequent in generation may be antecedent in substance, corporeity would be antecedent to a surface and a length, and will be both perfect and an entirety in this way in preference, because it is rendered a thing that is animated. But how, one may ask, would a line or a surface become animated? For such an axiom as this would be above the grasp of our senses. Further, it is true, corporeity constitutes a certain substance, for already doth it in a manner involve that which is perfect. But how are lines said to be substances? For neither are they substances in the same manner as species, and a certain form. For example, if in such a case we should admit that soul were a thing of this sort, nor are they substances in the same way as matter. For instance, take the case of body as a thing of this description. For nothing appears as endued with a capacity of consisting either from lines or surfaces or points. But supposing that it were a certain material substance, this would appear as one that is endued with a capacity of assuming passive states. In definition, then, granting that mathematical natures will be antecedent to sense, yet it does not follow that all things whatsoever that are prior in definition should be prior also in substance. For those things that are prior in substance indeed are whatsoever things which, involving a separate subsistence, are transcendent in their essence. But all those things are prior in definition, of which there are definitions compounded of definitions. These, however, are not inherent at the same time. For if there are not in existence passive conditions, independent of the substances to which they belong, as, for example, a something that has motion imparted to it, or which is white, whiteness will be prior to a white man, and will be prior in accordance with the definition, but not in accordance with the substance. For it does not admit of a separate subsistence, but it always subsists in conjunction with a thing in its entirety. Now, I mean by entirety a man, for instance, who is white. Wherefore, it is evident that neither is that prior which subsists by abstraction, nor is that subsequent which subsists by addition. For by addition is a man styled white by reason of whiteness. That indeed, therefore, neither are mathematical entities in a greater degree existences than bodies, and that they are not antecedent in their essence to those objects that fall under the notice of the senses, but are so merely in point of definition, and that it is not possible that they should be made to involve a separate subsistence in any place, has been declared with sufficient clearness. Since, however, neither in sensibles is it possible for these to subsist, it is evident that either, in short, they have no existence at all, or they subsist after some mode or other, and on this account not simply do they exist, for existence we predicate multifariously. Chapter 3. For, in the same manner also as universals in mathematics are not conversant about things that have been separated, and in this condition of separation subsist independent of magnitudes and numbers, but are concerned about these, but not so far forth as they are things of such a kind as to involve magnitude, or to be divisible, it is evident that there is a possibility of there likewise being in existence both definitions and demonstrations respecting those magnitudes which fall under the notice of our senses, not, however, so far forth as they are things cognizable by sense, but so far forth as they are universals. For in like manner as, also, so far forth as things are in motion merely, there are many formal principles of them, independent of the essence of each of the things of this sort, and of their accidents. And since there is no necessity, on account of these things, either that there should exist anything that is being moved in a condition of actual separation from sensibles, or that there should be in things that are such as these any separated nature at all, so therefore, likewise, in the case of things that are being moved, will there be rational principles and sciences, not, however, so far forth as they are things that are in motion, but so far forth as they are bodies merely, and again, so far forth as they are surfaces merely, and so far forth as they are lengths merely, and so far as they are divisible, and so far as they are indivisible, and things which involve position, and so far forth as they are indivisible merely. Wherefore, since it is absolutely true to affirm not only that things capable of a separate subsistence exist, but also things that are not capable of this separable subsistence, as, for instance, that things in motion exist, so, as regards mathematical entities, it is absolutely true to affirm that such mathematical entities exist, and that, at any rate, they are such as they are asserted to be. And, likewise, as it is absolutely true to affirm, in respect of the rest of the sciences, that there are sciences conversant with this particular thing, and not with that which is accidental to it, for instance, that there is one of what is white, if that which is salubrious should be what is white, but so far forth as it is salubrious, yet they are not conversant with that, I say, which is salubrious, but with that to which each science of it belongs, if it is salubrious, that is, in this case with the salubrious, and if so far forth as such is a man, it is conversant with man, so also that this is the case with geometry. It does not, however, follow, even though sensibles happen to belong to those objects about which geometry is conversant, and, though it may not be conversant with them so far forth as they are sensibles, that the mathematical sciences will be concerned with objects that fall under the notice of the senses, and they will not certainly be conversant with these while there are in existence other separate natures. But many things are essentially accidental in things, as far forth as each peculiar quality of such is inherent in each, since both as far as an animal is female, and so far forth as it is male, these are its peculiar affections, although there is not anything that is female, or anything that is male, which involves a subsistence separable from animals. Wherefore also the case is the same so far forth as there are lengths merely, and so far as there are surfaces. And by so much the more as geometry is employed about those things that are prior in definition, and which are more simple, by so much the more does it involve the consideration of what is accurate. But the accurate is what is simple. Wherefore geometry speculates into things that are without magnitude, rather than into those that are connected with magnitude, and especially are without motion. But if it contemplates motion, especially will it contemplate that motion which is primary or original, for this is most simple, and of this is that motion which is equable. And there is the same mode of reasoning both in the case of the sciences of harmonics and optics, for neither are the speculations of either carried on as far forth as the power of vision, or as far forth as voice is concerned, but as far forth as lines and numbers are the objects of inquiry. For these, of course, are the appropriate affections of those, and this is the case with mechanical science in like manner. Wherefore, if anyone, admitting the existence of those things which involve a separate subsistence from accidents, makes any inquiry respecting these so far forth as they are such, he will not for this reason utter any falsehood, just as neither does he do so when he describes anything on the earth and says that that is the measure of a foot, which is not the measure of a foot. For not in the propositions doth the falsehood lurk. But thus would each particular be investigated in the most excellent manner, if anyone, having effected, as he thought, a separation, should regard as such that which does not in reality possess a separate subsistence, as is done by the arithmetician and geometrician. For one indeed and indivisible is man, so far forth as he is man, but the arithmetician has established an indivisible one, and next he considers whether there is anything that is an accident in man, so far forth as he is indivisible. The geometrician, on the other hand, carries on speculations relative to man, neither as far forth as he is man, nor as far forth as he is indivisible, but as far forth as he is a solid. For what things, even though he were not indivisible anywhere, would be inherent in him is evident, because even without these, that which is endued with capacity admits of being inherent in this very man. Wherefore, on this account, geometricians with correctness make assertions, and discourse concerning entities, and entities have an existence, for twofold is entity, the one subsisting in actuality, and the other materially. Since, however, that which is good is different from that which is fair, for the one is always in conjunction with the method of doing a thing, but that which is fair also resides in things that are immovable, those who assert that the mathematical sciences make no affirmation about what is fair or good make a false assertion. For they do speak of these, and frame demonstrations of them in the most eminent sense of the word. For if they do not actually employ these names, they do not exhibit even the results and the reasons of these, and therefore they can hardly be said to make any assertion about them. Of what is fair, however, the most important species are order and symmetry, and that which is definite, which the mathematical sciences make manifest in a most eminent degree. And since, at least, these appear to be the causes of many things, now I mean, for example, order and that which is a definite thing, it is evident that they would assert also the existence of a cause of this description, and its subsistence after the same manner as that which is fair subsists in. We will, however, declare our sentiments in regard of these points in a more intelligible form elsewhere. Chapter 4. Respecting indeed, therefore, mathematical natures, that they are entities, and how far they are entities, and how in one respect they are not antecedent to sense, and how in another they are antecedent, let thus much suffice to have been said on this subject. Concerning ideas, however, we must in the first instance examine into the actual opinion in regard of the idea which would not in any degree connect it with the nature of numbers, but in accordance with the hypothesis that has prevailed from the earliest age amongst those who originally were the first to affirm the existence of ideas. The opinion, however, in regard of forms, happened to be adopted by those who make assertions in this way, on account of their being persuaded, respecting the reality of this dogma, by the arguments adduced by Heraclitus, to show that all entities that fall under the notice of the senses are in a state of continual flux. Wherefore, if there are systems of science and of practical wisdom conversant about anything, we affirm that some different natures, in a condition of permanence, must necessarily exist beside those that are cognizant by the senses. For it is plain that a science of those things that are in a state of flux has no existence. Now, seeing that Socrates was engaged in forming systems in regard of the ethical or moral virtues, and was the first to institute an investigation in regard of the universal definition of these, for, to be sure, Democritus, to a small extent, merely busied himself in physical inquiries, and defined after what mode that which is hot and that which is cold subsisted. But the Pythagoreans, previously to his time, brought forward definitions in respect of some few things, the formal principles of which these philosophers connected with numbers, as, for example, take the instance what opportunity constitutes, or justice, or marriage. Socrates, notwithstanding, I say, from time to time investigated into quiddity, or what a thing is, and this too on rational grounds. For his aim was to form syllogisms, and we know that quiddity is a first principle of syllogisms, for dialectical strength not as yet had at that time any existence, so that they were able, even without the possession of quiddity, or the substance of a thing, to institute inquiries into those things that are contraries, even though we should suppose that there would be the same science of contraries. For there are two improvements in science which one might justly ascribe to Socrates. Now I allude to his employment of inductive arguments, and his definition of the universal, for both of these belong to a science that is conversant about a first principle. Socrates, however, did not, it is true, constitute universals as things involving a separable subsistence, nor did he regard the definitions as such. The other philosophers, however, invested them with a separate subsistence, and, in addition, they denominated things of this sort as the ideas of entities. Wherefore it occurred to them, almost for the same reason, that there exist ideas of all things which are predicated universally, and this assumption is just as if one desirous of reckoning a particular sum, when in fact the component parts were fewer in number, should consider it an impossibility to do so, but when he had made them more numerous, should succeed in counting them. For more numerous, so to say, are forms than singulars that fall under the notice of sense. From an investigation into the causes of which did these speculators advance from sensibles to ideas. For a form is a thing that is of the same import with a sensible singular, and it subsists independent of substances. And forms are there in the case of many other things, namely, both in these particular things and in those that are eternal. Further, in the modes in which it is demonstrated that forms exist, according to none of these is it apparent that they really do exist. For from some of them it is not necessary that a syllogism should arise, but from certain others, and in the case of things where they do not suppose that there are forms in existence, of these are there generated forms. For, according to the rational principles that may be adduced from the other sciences, there will subsist forms of all things of whatsoever there are sciences, and according to the notion of the unity that is involved in plurality, will there subsist forms also of negations, and according to the perception of something belonging to what has been corrupted, will there be forms of things subject to corruption, for of these is there a certain impression on the mind. But further, with respect to the most accurate of the arguments that have been brought forward in favour of the ideal theory, certain speculators, no doubt, make ideas to belong to relatives of which they do not affirm that there is an essential genus, whereas others assert the existence of a third man. And in general, the arguments concerning forms overturn the very things which those persons who maintain the existence of these forms would desire to exist, in preference to the existence of the forms themselves. For it happens that the duad is not first, but that the number is, and prior to this is that which is relative, and that which involves an essential subsistence is prior to, and this will be the case with all those things whatsoever which certain philosophers, in their adherence to these opinions respecting forms, have put forward in opposition to first principles. Further, according indeed to that supposition by which these speculators affirm the existence of ideas, not only will there be forms of substances, but of many other things besides. For there is not only the one concept about substances, but also concerning those things that are not substances, and there will be systems of scientific knowledge conversant not about substances merely. But there are innumerable other consequences that ensue unto this hypothesis, in accordance, however, with what is necessary, and with the opinions that are prevalent concerning the ideal theory. On the supposition that the forms are participants, it is expedient that there should be ideas of substances merely, for these do not participate according to what is accidental. But it is requisite that they should participate of each thing so far forth as there doth not exist a predication of it of a subject. Now, I say, for example, if anything participates of the twofold itself, this also participates of what is everlasting, but according to accident, for it is an accident for the twofold to be everlasting. Wherefore, forms will constitute substance, and these here and there are in their signification equivalent to substance. Or can we say that there is any existence of anything independent of these? Take the case, for instance, of the notion of unity involved in that of plurality. And surely, if one establish that there is the same form of the ideas as of those things that are participants of them, there will subsist something that is in common to both. For why, may I ask, in the case of corruptible duads, and of duads that are many, I admit, in number yet everlasting, why, I say, in the case of these, is the duad one and the same thing, rather than in the case both of this and a certain particular duad? If, however, there is not the same form of these, the result would be that entities would be homonymous, and the case would be just as if one should call both Callias and a piece of wood a man, though at the same time unable to discern any point of communion between them. If, however, we shall establish that other things, now I mean common reasons, are capable of adaptation to the forms, as for instance a plane figure to the circle itself, as well as the other portions or the definitions of the circle, and if that also to which it belongs will be annexed in addition, if all this be done, we ought to institute an inquiry as to whether or not this may be entirely an ineffectual proceeding. For also, to what, it may be asked, will the addition be made, whether to the centre, or to the surface, or to all the parts? For all things that are involved in substance constitute ideas, for instance animal and biped. Further, it is evident that it is necessary that a thing itself should be something, in the same way as a surface must be some nature or other which will be inherent in all the forms, as is the case with the genus. Chapter 5. But most especially might one raise the question as to what at all it is that forms contribute either to the things that are eternal amongst those that fall under the notice of our senses, or to things that are being generated and corrupted. For neither are these a cause to them of any motion, or of any change whatever. But certainly neither do these forms render any assistance towards the advancement of the science of other things, for neither are those the substance of these, for in such a case they would be inherent in them, nor do they contribute to the existence of anything at all, inasmuch as they are not at least inherent in those things that are participants. For if they were so, they might perhaps seem to be equivalent with causes, as in the case of what is white when it has been mixed with what is white. But undoubtedly may this reason be very easily overturned, a tenet to be sure, which Anaxagoras in the first instance, and subsequently to his age Eudoxus, and certain other speculators from time to time maintained whilst labouring under doubts. The theory itself, however, I say, is capable of refutation, for it would be easy to collect together many antagonistic arguments, as well as many impossible consequences in reference to such an opinion. But the fact is that neither do other things subsist from the forms according to any of the modes which are accustomed to be put forward by the advocates of the ideal hypothesis. And the assertion that ideas are models or exemplars, and that other things participate in these, is to speak quite at random, and to assert what is tantamount with mere poetic metaphors. For what, allow me to ask, is that which operates, having an eye, so to say, or looking towards the ideas? For anything whatsoever admits of coming into existence, and of being generated, and yet there is no consequent necessity that it should be a thing that is modelled after some form or image, so that even though we should suppose Socrates to exist, and not to exist, there yet would be generated some such thing as Socrates actually is. And in like manner is it evident that this would be the case even though Socrates were eternal. Also will there subsist many paradigms or models of the same thing, so that this will hold good of the forms likewise, as in the instance of man. Animal and biped will subsist as forms in conjunction also with ideal man. Further, not only will the forms constitute the paradigms of sensibles, but also those of themselves, as genus might be regarded a paradigm of species that are generic. Wherefore, the exemplar and the image will be the same thing. Further, it would appear an impossibility that substance, and that to which the substance belongs, should be separate. Wherefore, how would ideas which are said to constitute the substances of things involve a separable subsistence? In the Phaedo, however, is an assertion made to this effect. I mean, to the effect that forms are the causes both of existence and of generation. Nevertheless, on the supposition of the existence of these forms, entities, notwithstanding, are not being produced, if also there should not subsist something that is likely to be an efficient cause. And to this we may add that different other things are generated, as a house and a ring, of which they do not say that there are forms at all. Wherefore it is evident that those things also, of which these advocates of the ideal theory say that there are ideas, may both exist and be generated on account of such causes as we may consider the things also to be that have been just now mentioned, but not on account of forms. But, certainly, as far as regards the subject of the ideal hypothesis, it is possible, both in the manner now adopted, as well as by means of arguments that are more logical and accurate, to collect together many similar points with those that already have been made subjects of inquiry. Chapter 6. Now, since we have thus far arrived at some settlement of the controversy concerning these upholders of the ideal theory, it is well once more to examine into the consequences in respect of numbers that happen in the systems of those who assert that they are substances that involve a separable subsistence, and the primary causes of entities. It is necessary, however, on the supposition that number constitutes a certain nature, and that there is not any other substance of it, but this very thing, as certain affirm. It is, I say, undoubtedly necessary, in this case, that something belonging to it should be classed as what is primary, whereas that something as consequential to this be in every instance different in form. And this directly resides either in monads, and then every monad whatsoever is incapable of comparison with any monad whatsoever, or all of these are directly in order consequent, and any whatsoever are comparable with any monads whatsoever, as scientific men affirm to be the case with mathematical number. For in mathematical number there is no difference as regards any monad one from another, or shall we say that, as far as the monads are concerned, that some of them are capable of comparison with one another, whereas some are not? just as if the first duad were to subsist after unity, and next in order the triad, and so therefore another number. But the monads in each number are capable of being compared one with another, as the monads contained in the first duad are with themselves, and those in the first triad with themselves, and so therefore is it in the case of the rest of the numbers. Those monads, however, that are contained in the duad itself are incapable of comparison with those that are contained in the triad itself, and the case is the same with the other consecutive numbers. Wherefore also the mathematician reckons 2 after the 1, along with the one before, another 1, and after the numeration of the 3, in addition to these 2, he subjoins another 1, and the rest in like manner. But this philosopher, I mean Plato, after the 1, reckons 2 others without the first one, and the triad without the duad, and the case stands the same with the other number. Or shall we say that one sort of numbers should subsist as that which has been mentioned first, but another such as the mathematicians put forward, and a third which has been spoken of as last? Further, it is evident that these numbers are either separable from things or are not separable, but are resident in objects that fall under the notice of our senses, yet not in these in such a manner as we have considered at the first, but as subsisting in sensibles through inherent numbers. Or, at any rate, one kind of these must have a subsistence thus, and another not so, or all of them must exist thus. The modes indeed, therefore, according to which it is possible that these should exist are necessarily only these. In general, however, those philosophers who affirm unity to be a first principle, and a substance and element of all things, and that number derives its existence from this, and from a certain other one, almost each of them has declared his adherence to some one of these modes, with the exception of that one where all the monads are assumed as being incapable of comparison one with another. And this has happened consistently with rational principles, for it is not admissible that there should be further another mode of the subsistence of number beside those that have been enumerated. Some therefore assert that both are numbers, and that one of these modes, which involves what is antecedent and what is subsequent, accords with ideas, but that mathematical number is different from ideas and sensibles, and that both ideas and mathematical number possess a separable subsistence from sensibles, whereas others assert that mathematical number only it is that is the original of entities, and that it has been actually separated from sensibles. And the Pythagoreans say that there exists the mathematical unit, but not one which has been separated, but they affirm that sensible substances consist from this. For the entire heaven they construct out of numbers, with the exception of those that are not monadic numbers, but they suppose that the monads involve magnitude. Yet, as to how the first unit consists, possessed of magnitude, they seem to be involved in perplexity. A certain other philosopher, however, affirms that the first number is that one which ranks amongst forms, and others say that mathematical number is this first number. And in like manner also is it the case in regard both of lengths and surfaces, and in regard of solids. For some say that those which are mathematical are different from those that subsist after ideas. But in the case of those who say otherwise, some, it is true, speak of mathematical natures even mathematically, as many, I mean, as do not constitute the ideas as numbers, or say that the ideas exist. But others speak of the mathematical number, yet not mathematically, however. For what they maintain is this, that neither is every magnitude divided into magnitudes, nor that any monads whatsoever can compose a duad. All speculators, however, with the exception of such of the Pythagorics as assert that unity constitutes, as it may be said, an element and first principle of entities, seek to establish the dogma that numbers partake of the nature of monads. Yet those undoubtedly speak of monads as involving magnitude, as has been stated previously. In what number of ways it is admissible, therefore, that statements should have been made respecting numbers, and that all such methods have been enumerated, is evident from these foregoing assertions. All these assertions, however, are, to be sure, impossible, but perhaps one more than another. Chapter 7. In the first place, then, we must examine whether monads are capable of mutual comparison, or are incapable of such comparison, and on the supposition of their being incapable of comparison, whether they are to be viewed in the manner that we have divided. For indeed it is possible that any monad whatsoever should not admit of being compared with any whatsoever. And it is possible that those monads that are resident in the actual duad should not be capable of a comparison with those that are in the actual triad, and so therefore that those be incapable of comparison with one another which are contained in each primary number. If, therefore, all the monads are capable of comparison, and devoid of any mutual difference, mathematical number, and one number alone, come into being, and it is not admissible that ideas should constitute number. For what sort of a number will an ideal man be, or an ideal animal, or any other species whatsoever? For there is one idea of each, as one idea of man himself, and of animal itself there is another one. Numbers, however, that are similar and devoid of difference are infinite. Wherefore, in no respect will this triad constitute ideal man more than any other one whatever. On the supposition, however, that the ideas are not numbers, neither is it possible that these exist at all. For from what first principles, may I ask, will the ideas be derived? For number is derivable from unity, and the duad, which is indefinite, and these are said to be the first principles and the elements of number, and it is not admissible to arrange them in classes, either as prior or subsequent to numbers. If, however, monads are incapable of comparison, and incapable of comparison after this mode, so that everything whatever is different from everything whatever, neither is it admissible that this can constitute mathematical number. For, in fact, mathematical number is derived from monads which are devoid of difference, and things that are demonstrated thereby are found to harmonize with monads of this description. Nor yet can this number belong to forms, for the first duad will not be derived from unity and the indefinite duad. In the next place, the consecutive numbers, as it is affirmed, are duad, triad, tetrad. For at the same time are the monads produced, which are contained in the first duad, whether after the same manner as the philosopher was for maintaining who first made the assertion of their subsistence from unequal monads, for from things reduced to a state of equality they have been actually produced, or whether they have a subsistence in another way. In the next place, on the supposition that there will be one monad that is prior to another, it will also be prior to the duad that is derived from these. For in case of the subsistence of anything, there is something prior and something subsequent. Likewise will that which subsists from these be a thing that is antecedent to the one, but subsequent to the other. Further, whereas this actual unity is first, then doth there belong a certain first unit to the others, and a second after that, and again a third. There will be a second, of course, after the second, and a third after the first one. Wherefore the monads would be antecedent to the numbers of which they are composed, as, to give an instance, in the duad there will reside a third monad antecedent to the existence of the number 3, and in the triad a fourth, and in the tetrad a fifth, before the existence of these numbers. No one indeed, therefore, of these aforesaid philosophers hath asserted that the monads are incapable of comparison after this mode. But in accordance, to be sure, with the principles of those speculators, it is reasonable that the case should be even so, though, according to reality, such is impossible. For also, that monads should be prior and subsequent is reasonable enough, provided there may be in existence both a certain first monad and first unit, and that in like manner also this should be the case in regard of duads, on the supposition that there is a first duad likewise. For, after that which is first, it is rational and necessary that there should be a something that is second, and if a something that is second, a third, and so therefore of the rest in order. At the same time, however, to assert the existence of both, even the existence of a first monad, and of a second after unity, and of a first duad, this is impossible. But they introduce a monad, I admit, and a first one, but no longer do they bring forward a second and a third, and they introduce a first duad, but no longer do they bring forward a second and a third. But it is evident also that such is not admissible on the supposition that all the monads are incapable of comparison. I mean, that an actual duad and a triad, and so the other numbers, should have a subsistence. For whether the monads be devoid of difference, and whether they are severally different one from another, it is necessary that number be reckoned according to addition, as for instance the duad by the addition of one to another one, and the triad by the addition of another one to the two, and the tetrad in like manner. Inasmuch as these things, however, are so, it is impossible that there should be a generation of numbers after this mode, that is, in the same manner as certain speculators generate them from the duad and from unity. For the duad becomes a portion of the triad, and the triad of the tetrad, and in the same manner does it happen in the case of those numbers also that follow next in order. But from the first duad, and from the duad that is indefinite, is formed the tetrad, being two duads in addition to the actual duad. But on the supposition that the actual duad is not a portion, there will exist still another single duad, and the duad will be derived from unity itself, and another one. And if this be the case, it is not possible that also an indefinite duad should constitute the other element, for it produces one monad, but not a definite duad. Further, beside the actual triad and the actual duad, how, may I ask, will there exist other triads and duads, and in what manner are they compounded of prior and subsequent monads? For all these assumptions are even fictitious, and it is impossible that there be a first duad, then an actual triad, and it would be necessary that this should be the case on the supposition that unity and the indefinite duad will constitute elements of numbers. If, however, consequences that are impossibilities ensue, it is likewise impossible that these should be first principles. If indeed, therefore, the monads are different, any one whatsoever from any one whatsoever, these and such other results necessarily ensue. But if the monads that are resident in another number are different, and others that are inherent in the same number are alone devoid of any such mutual difference, even in this case not a whit the less do consequences ensue that are attended with difficulty. As, for instance, in the decade itself are involved 10 monads, and the decade is composed both of these and of 2 pentads. Since, however, the decade itself is not an ordinary number, and since it is not compounded of ordinary pentads, as neither of ordinary monads, it is necessary that the monads should involve a mutual difference, I mean those that are contained in this decade. For if they do not involve this difference, neither will the pentads be different of which the decade is composed. Yet, since they do involve this difference, the monads likewise will differ. And on the supposition that they differ, whether does it follow that there will not be inherent different other pentads, but merely those 2, or that there will be inherent such? And if we do not suppose this to be the case, namely, that they will be inherent, it is absurd. Or, if they will be inherent, what sort will be the decade that is composed of those? For there is not another decade resident in the decade beside itself. But assuredly also it is necessary that the tetrad, at any rate, be not compounded of the ordinary or casual duads. For the indefinite duad, as they say, receiving the definite duad, has produced two duads, for it causes the duad it has received to become two. Further, the existence beside the two monads of the duad as a certain nature, and of the triad beside the three monads, how, may I ask, is such admissible? For one will either partake of the other, as a white man beside white and man, for he partakes of these, or will do so when the one amounts to a certain difference of the other, as man beside animal and biped. Further, some things are one in contact, and others by mixture, and others by position, not one of which is it admissible should be inherent in the monads from which the duad and the triad are compounded. But just as two men are not one certain thing beside both, so it is necessary also that the case should stand with the monads. And they will not be said to differ because they are indivisible, for on this account also are points indivisible. But nevertheless the duad of them will not be anything different from the two. But undoubtedly neither should this escape our notice, that it happens that there will exist prior and subsequent duads, and in like manner doth the case stand with the rest of the numbers. For indeed, even allowing the duads to rank in the tetrad, one along with another, yet these are antecedent to those in the octade, and they themselves have produced, as the duad has these, the tetrads that are contained in the octade itself, so that if, also, the first duad be an idea, these likewise will constitute certain ideas. And there is the same reasoning applicable to the case of the monads also. For the monads in the first duad produced the four monads that are in the tetrad. Wherefore all the monads become ideas, and an idea will be compounded of ideas. Wherefore it is evident that those things of which the ideas themselves happen to be compounded will be composite natures, just as if one were to say that animals are compounded of animals. If there are ideas of these, ideas will be compounded of animals. And in general, to make monads to involve a mutual difference of any kind whatsoever would be an absurd and fictitious supposition. Now, I mean by fictitious a thing that is forcibly contrived so as to suit a particular hypothesis. For neither according to quantity, nor according to quality, do we see a monad differing from a monad, and it is requisite that every number should be either equal or unequal, but particularly that which is monadic. Wherefore, if it be neither greater nor less, it will be equal. But things that are equal, and in short, devoid of mutual difference, we consider to be the same in numbers. And if this be not admitted, neither will there be in this decade duads that are without a difference, seeing that they are equal. For what cause will one be able to bring forward who makes the assertion that they are devoid of this mutual difference? Moreover, if every monad and another monad make two, a monad which is taken from the duad itself, and the duad which is taken from the triad itself, will be derived from monads that are different. And the question may be put as to whether this duad will be antecedent to the triad, or subsequent to it. But there appears to exist a greater necessity for its being antecedent. For the one subsists along with a triad, and the other along with a duad of monads. And we indeed in general are inclined to adopt the supposition that one and one are two, even whether they may be equal or unequal, as for instance, what is good and what is evil, and man and horse. They who make assertions in this way do not make these assertions of the monads, however. But if the number belonging to the triad itself be not a greater number than that belonging to the duad, it is astonishing. Or, on the supposition of its being greater, it is evident that there is an equal number also in the duad. Wherefore, this will be without a difference from the duad itself. This, however, does not admit of taking place if there is a certain first number and a second number, neither will the ideas be numbers. For this very assertion do they correctly make who think that the monads should involve mutual differences, since they will constitute ideas, as has been previously stated, for the subject of both will be one form. But if the monads do not involve this difference, both the duads and the triads will be indifferent likewise. Wherefore, to the authors of this assertion, it is necessary to say that in counting 1, 2 in this way, we must not, beside what is previously existing, make any additional assumption of anything, for neither will there subsist generation from the indefinite duad, nor is it possible that an idea can exist, for there will be one idea inherent in another, and all forms will be parts of one. Wherefore, consistently, I admit, with their hypothesis do they make their assertions, yet upon the whole they do not make their assertions even consistently with their hypothesis. For they overturn many things, since they are likely to say that this itself at least involves a certain doubt, namely, whether, when we count and say 1, 2, 3, we additionally assume anything in counting, or whether we carry on our reckoning according to parts. We do so, however, in both cases. Wherefore, it would be ridiculous to reduce this into so great a difference of substance. Chapter 8. In the first place, however, above all, it is well that we should come to some final distinctions as to what the difference is between a number and a monad, if there is any difference at all. Now, it is necessary that this difference exist either according to quantity or according to quality, yet neither of these appears to be admissible. But, so far forth as number is concerned, the difference subsists according to quantity. And, therefore, if monads likewise differ in quantity, one number also would differ from another number, though it may be equal in the multitude of the monads. Further, may we ask whether the first monads are greater or less, and whether they may subsequently increase, or the contrary? For all these statements are irrational, but undoubtedly neither is it admissible that they should differ according to quality, for it is not possible that there should reside subsequently in them any passive condition, for also they say that there inheres in numbers quality subsequently to quantity. Further, neither would it happen unto them that this should be derived from unity, nor from the duad, for the one is not quality, whereas the other partakes of the nature of a constituent of quantity. For of the existence of many entities is the actual nature of them a cause. But if, then, this subsists after a certain manner differently, we must declare that this is the case likewise in the most eminent degree with a first principle, and we must come to some final distinction respecting the difference of the monad, namely, that it is especially a necessary one, and why there exists a necessity that this should be the case. If monads, however, do not differ in quantity, nor yet in quality, what difference can speculators assume as existing in them? That indeed, therefore, on the supposition that ideas are numbers, it is admissible that all the monads neither should be capable of comparison, nor should be incapable of comparison one with another in either of these ways. This point is evident. But, assuredly, after the manner in which certain other philosophers make statements respecting numbers, neither are such assertions made correctly. And these are such as do not consider that there are ideas in existence, neither simply considered, nor as being certain numbers, but lay down the existence of mathematical entities, and contend that numbers are most original amongst entities, and that actual unity constitutes a first principle of them. For it would be absurd to go on the supposition that unity should be something primary amongst the units, as those persons assert it is, but that a duad should not be something primary amongst duads, nor the triad amongst triads, for all such points rest on the same reasoning. If indeed, therefore, the assertions in regard of number may be viewed after this manner, and if one will seek to establish that mathematical number exists solely, unity in such a case does not constitute a first principle of numbers, for it is requisite that unity, such as this is, should differ from the rest of the monads, and if this be admitted, there will necessarily exist a certain first duad that is different from the other duads, and in like manner also will it be so with the rest of the numbers, I mean, such as are consecutive. If, however, unity constitute a first principle, there subsists the greater necessity that the case should stand just as Plato used to say the points regarding number were disposed, and that there should exist a certain first duad and triad, and that numbers should be not capable of comparison with one another. But, on the other hand, if any one again should maintain these assertions, it has been declared that many impossibilities ensue. But certainly it is at any rate necessary that the case be either in that way or this way. Wherefore, on the supposition that it be in neither way, it would not be admissible that number should involve a separate subsistence. It is evident, however, from these statements that the third mode is expressed even in the worst manner, I mean, that one which makes out that the number which belongs to forms, as well as mathematical number, are the same. For it is necessary that two errors at the same time should concur with one opinion. For neither is it possible that mathematical number should subsist in this manner, but as regards a person indulging in peculiar hypotheses, it is necessary that he should be prolix, and that he should enumerate the consequences also, whatsoever they are, which ensue unto those who denominate numbers as forms. This is requisite likewise. But the plan of the Pythagorics partly, no doubt, involves fewer difficulties than the statements that have been previously made, but partly it involves certain different difficulties peculiar to itself. For the constituting number as that which possesses a subsistence, not separable from sensibles, removes many of the impossibilities. But the assertion that bodies are compounded out of numbers, and that this number is mathematical, is impossible. For neither is it correct to say that it constitutes individual magnitudes, and in the next place, because in the most eminent degree they are disposed after this mode, the monads at any rate do not involve magnitude. And how is it possible that magnitudes should be composed of things indivisible? But assuredly, mathematical number at least in its nature is monadic, yet those persons say that entities constitute number. At any rate, their speculations do they try and harmonize with bodies, as if numbers were derived from those. If, therefore, it is requisite, on the supposition of number being something essentially belonging to entities, that some one of those modes that have been mentioned should exist, but it is not admissible that any one of these should exist, it is evident, then, that there doth not subsist any such nature of numbers as those furnish who constitute number as that which possesses a separate subsistence. Further, might the question be asked, whether does each monad consist from the great and the small equalized, or whether is the one monad from the little and another from the great? If indeed, therefore, the case stands thus, neither will each number consist from all the elements, nor will the monads be devoid of mutual difference. For in this monad will be inherent the great, and in that the small, being what is in its own nature contrary. Further, how are those resident in the triad itself? For one of them is uneven. But perhaps on this account they make actual unity in what is uneven a mean. But if each of the monads arises from both the elements equalized, how will the duad constitute one certain nature compounded from the great and small? Or what difference will there be in this from the monad? Further, the monad is antecedent to the duad, for when it is taken away, the duad is taken away. Therefore, it is necessary that this be an idea of an idea, being at any rate antecedent to an idea, and that it has been produced prior to such. Of what, then, will it be? For the indefinite duad would be formative of duality. Further, it is necessary that, certainly, number be infinite or finite, for speculators make number to be that which involves a separate subsistence, so that it is not possible that the other of these should not subsist. That, therefore, it is not possible that it should be infinite is evident, for neither is infinite number odd, nor is it even, but the generation of numbers is invariably either of an odd number or of an even. When unity in one instance falls upon an even number, an odd number is produced, and when the duad in another case falls upon the even, that which is from unity is rendered twofold, and when it falls in a third way upon the odd numbers, another even number is produced. Further, if every idea belongs to some particular thing, but numbers are ideas, infinite number also will be the idea of something, either of sensibles or of something else, although neither does this admit of taking place according to position, nor according to reason, but philosophers arrange the ideas after this manner. On the supposition, however, that number is finite, how far in point of quantity does it extend? For it is requisite that this should be declared, not only that the fact is so, but also why it is so. Undoubtedly, however, if number extends up to the decade, as certain say, in the first place, of course, will forms fail quickly. As, for instance, if the triad constitute ideal man, what number will ideal horse be? For every ideal number reaches up to the decade. Therefore, it is necessary that certain numbers exist of those residing in these, for these are substances and ideas. Notwithstanding, however, they will fail, for the species of animal already will be superabundant. At the same time, it is, however, evident that if the triad in this way be ideal man, the rest of the triads likewise will be so. For similar are those that are inherent in the same numbers, wherefore will there exist infinite men. If indeed every triad constitutes an idea, each man will be an ideal man, but if not, yet at any rate men will be so. And if the smaller belong as a portion to the greater, namely, that which is of the monads that are capable of comparison as a portion of those that are in the same number, and if the tetrad itself be an idea of anything, as of a horse, or of what is white, man will be a part of horse, if man constitutes a duad. But absurd also is the supposition of there being an idea of the decade, but not of the endecade, nor of the numbers consecutive to this. Further, however, there both exist and are generated certain things of which there are not forms. Wherefore, the question comes to this, on what account are there not forms of those also? In such a case, the forms do not constitute causes. Moreover, it would be absurd to imagine that number, as far as the decade, should be a certain entity in a greater degree, and a form of the decade itself, although there is no generation of this, as of an unit, but of that there is. Philosophers attempt, however, to alter their opinions, as if the supposition were true that number up to the decade were a perfect one. They generate at any rate the things thereon following, as, take the case of vacuity, proportion, the odd, and other things of this kind, within the decade, for some things they ascribe to first principles, for example, motion, rest, good, evil, but other things to numbers. Wherefore, unity amounts to what is odd, for if it is resident in the triad, how will the pentad constitute what is odd? Further, how far do magnitudes, and as many such bodies as there are, partake of quantity? For instance, the first indivisible line, next a duad, and next those numbers up to a decade. Further, on the supposition that number involves a separate subsistence, one might feel a doubt as to whether unity were antecedent, or the triad and the duad. As far forth, therefore, as number is compounded, unity is antecedent. But as far forth as what is universal and is form are prior, number involves an antecedent subsistence. For each of the monads constitutes a portion of number as matter, but the other as form. And no doubt in one way is the right prior to the acute angle, because it has been limited by its definition, and in another way is the acute prior to the right, because it is a part of it, and the right angle is divided into the acute. Undoubtedly, indeed, as matter, the acute angle and the element and the monad are prior, and again, as in reference to form and substance, such as subsists according to definition, is the right angle prior, and so with the entire, which is compounded of matter and form. For both are more proximate to form, and to that which definition belongs unto, but in generation are they subsequent. How then, may I ask, is unity a first principle? Because it is not, they say, divisible, but is indivisible, both that which is universal, and that which is particular, and that which is an element. But in another manner is unity partly that which subsists according to definition, and partly that according to duration. In what way, then, does unity constitute a first principle? For, as has been declared, both the right angle seems to be antecedent to the acute, and the acute to the right, and each is one. Therefore, in both ways do speculators constitute unity as a first principle. But further, is this impossible? For the one subsists as form and substance, and the other as a part and as matter. For, in a manner, each one in reality subsists in capacity, if, at least, number is one certain thing, and not as an aggregate heap. But different number subsists from different monads, as they say, and each monad does not subsist in actuality. A cause, however, of the error which ensues is this, that they are accustomed at the same time to pursue their investigations from the mathematical sciences, and from universal definitions. Wherefore, from those no doubt, as a point, have they established unity, and the first principle, for the monad is a point without position. As, therefore, certain others also have compounded entities out of what is least, so do these persons likewise. Wherefore, the monad becomes the matter of numbers, and at the same time is prior to the duad, and again is it subsequent to the duad, existing as a certain whole, and as an unit, and as species. On account, however, of their being engaged in investigating that which has been predicated universally as an unit, they in this way also have spoken of it as a part. But it is impossible that these should reside in the same subject at the same time. But on the supposition of its being necessary that unity itself should subsist merely without position, for in no respect is there a difference, save that it constitutes a first principle, and that the duad is divisible, whereas that the monad is not so. If this be the case, the monad would be more similar to unity itself. But if the monad alone be without position, unity will be more similar to the monad than to the duad, so that in either case each monad would be prior to the duad. These speculators do not say so, however, at least they generate the duad first. Further, on the supposition that the duad itself is a certain unit, and the triad itself both constitute a duad, from what then, may I ask, does the duad itself consist? Chapter 9. But one might also feel perplexed, since contact, likewise, has not an existence in numbers, but that which is consecutive has, in regard of whatsoever monads there is not to be found a medium, as those that are in the duad or the triad, whether what is consecutive is to be found in unity itself or not, and whether the duad be antecedent to those things that are consecutive, or anything whatsoever to the monads. And in like manner also, concerning the subsequent genera of number, do these difficulties ensue, both in the case of a line, and surface, and body. For some inquirers make lengths from the species of the great and the small, for instance, the lengths, as it were, from the long as well as from the short, but surfaces from wide and narrow, and bulks from what is profound and low. And these are species of the great and the small. In respect, however, of the principle that subsists according to unity, have different persons in different ways sought to establish their opinions upon points of this description. And in these also appear innumerable statements that are both impossible and fictitious, and which are contrary to all suppositions that are rational. For also it happens that they are severed in their connexion one with another, unless likewise the first principles are concomitant, so that there should exist what is broad and narrow, and long and short. And if this be admitted, the surface will constitute a line, and that which is solid a surface. Further, however, angles and figures and such like, how will they be assigned? And the same consequence ensues unto the points respecting numbers. For these are passive states belonging to magnitude. But magnitude is not a passive condition belonging unto these, as neither is length of straightness, and what is curved, nor solids of what is smooth and rough. Common, however, to all these assumptions is that which is allowable as a subject of perplexity in the case of species viewed in reference to genus, when one may admit the subsistence of universals, namely, whether animal itself may reside in animal, or there be something therein that is different from animal itself. For on the supposition that this is not separable, it will not create any doubt, but on the supposition of its being separable, as the persons who make these statements affirm, it would not be easy to decide the question of doubt respecting unity and respecting numbers. And if such be not easy, it is necessary to say what is impossible. For when any one understands unity as involved in the notion of the duad, and in general in that of number, the question arises whether does he perceive a certain actual thing or something else. Some, therefore, generate magnitudes from matter of this description, but others from a point. But a point seems to them not to be an unit, but to involve some similar quality with unity, and to belong to a different matter, such as multitude belongs to, but which does not belong to multitude, respecting which not a whit the less it happens that one feels the same doubts. For if in fact the matter is one, the same thing will be a line, and a surface, and a solid, for from the same things will be derived that which is one and the same thing. But if the matters are many in number, and there will exist one matter of a line, and another of a surface, and another of a solid, assuredly they will follow one another, or they will not, so that the same consequences will ensue likewise in this view of the case. For either the surface will not involve a line, or it will constitute a line. Further, how it is admissible that number should subsist from unity and plurality, there is no attempt made to show. Yet, howsoever, therefore, they happen to frame their statements, they encounter the same difficulties as those who make number to consist from unity, and from the duad, which is indefinite. For one indeed generates number out of that which is predicated universally, and not out of a certain multitude, but the other from a certain multitude, yet from that which is primary, for they say that the duad is a certain primary multitude. Wherefore there is no difference, so to speak, discoverable in all this, but the same doubts will follow, whether we assume it to be mixture, or position, or temperament, or generation, and whatever things of this kind there are. But one might especially inquire, supposing that each monad is one, from what does it subsist? For undoubtedly each will not constitute unity itself at least, but it is necessary that it be derived from unity itself, and from plurality, or from a portion of plurality. The assertion, therefore, that the monad constitutes a certain multitude is impossible, since at least it is indivisible. But the assertion that a monad is from a portion of multitude involves many other difficulties, for it is necessary also that each of the portions be indivisible, or that it constitute multitude, and that the monad should be divisible, and that unity and the multitude should not be an element, for each monad is not from multitude and an unit. Further, the person who puts forward this assertion does nothing else than make another number, for multitude is a number of indivisible things. Moreover also, it is worthy of inquiry in respect of those who make assertions in this way, whether number may be infinite or finite. For, as it appears, the multitude was also finite, out of which and unity finite monads were produced, and multitude itself is different from infinite multitude. What sort of multitude, then, and what sort of an element is unity? And in like manner might one inquire also respecting a point and the element from which they make magnitudes, for there is not merely at least one actual point. Therefore, at any rate, one might ask the question from what each of the rest of the points will ensue. For undoubtedly it is not from a certain interval at least, and an actual point. But assuredly neither is it admissible that indivisible portions constitute the portions of an interval, as they do of the multitude from which the monads consist. For number is composed of things that are indivisible, but this is not the case with magnitudes. Now, all these statements, as well as others of this kind, render it evident that it is an impossibility for number and for magnitudes to possess a separable subsistence. Moreover, the discordancy of the original framers of this theory respecting numbers is an indication that these things, not being true, are fraught with sources of confusion unto them. For some of this school constituting mathematical natures merely in addition to those that are cognizant by the senses, when they came to perceive the difficulty and fiction attendant upon forms, have withdrawn their assent from the ideal or formal number, and have introduced mathematical number in its stead. But others, wishing to make forms to exist at the same time with the numbers, but not discerning in what manner, on the supposition of one's admitting these as first principles, mathematical number will subsist independent of that which is ideal, have constituted ideal and mathematical number as the same in definition, since, in point of fact at least, mathematical number has been done away with in this hypothesis. For they introduce peculiar theories of their own, and such as are not consistent with mathematical science. The philosopher, however, who first sought to establish the existence of both forms and numbers in obedience to the dictates of reason, assigns a separate subsistence to forms and mathematical entities. Wherefore it happens that all of this sect express themselves correctly in a certain respect, no doubt, yet not entirely with correctness, and themselves likewise acknowledge so much, as being persons who do not make the same statements at all times, but such as are contrary with one another. And a cause of this is the following, that their suppositions and first principles are false. But it would be difficult from things that are not properly disposed in regard of truth and falsehood to frame an hypothesis with correctness, according to Epicharmus. For in this case, as soon as the assertion is made, immediately also is apparent that which is not properly disposed in the before-mentioned respect. Regarding numbers, however, let thus much suffice of the questions that have been started, and of the definitions and distinctions that have been framed. For a person who has been brought to a state of acquiescence in a theory would still the more be induced to yield assent from the force of more numerous arguments. But nothing further will prevail towards inducing persuasion in the case of one who has not been prevailed upon to yield his assent already. With respect, however, to first principles, and first causes, and elements, whatever assertions those persons put forward, who are engaged in framing their distinctions in regard of a substance merely cognizant by the senses, some of these, indeed, have been declared in our treatise on physics, but the remainder of them are omitted, seeing that they do not belong unto the plan of inquiry proposed to be pursued in our present work. But whatever assertions are made by those who affirm that there exist different substances independent of those that fall under the notice of our senses, this is a subject for investigation consecutive to those statements that have been already made upon this point. Since, therefore, certain persons affirm that there are such like ideas and numbers, and that the elements of these are elements and first principles of entities, with respect to these we must inquire what it is they say, and how they say it. Those philosophers, then, who are for constituting as such existences numbers only, and such as are mathematical numbers, are to form subjects for examination afterwards. Of those, however, who affirm the existence of the ideas, one should at the same time be able to perceive both the manner of their existence and the matter of doubt that is prevalent regarding them, for also do they constitute ideas as existing simultaneously with universal substances, and again they view them as involving a separate subsistence even from singulars. But that these statements are not possible has been previously made a matter of doubt. A cause, however, of their connecting these substances into one and the same species, I mean, with those persons who call ideas universals, is because they are not accustomed to constitute them as the same substances with sensibles. Some singulars, indeed, therefore, that are involved in objects that fall under the notice of our senses, they consider to be in a state of flux, and not one of them to remain in a condition of permanence, but that the universal subsists both beside these, and is something that is different from them. But, as we have declared in the foregoing statements, Socrates communicated an impulse, it is true, to this inquiry by reason of definitions, yet he did not really abstract them, at least from singulars, and, in thus not assigning them a separate subsistence, he formed his conceptions correctly. And one could make this assertion evident from the actual occurrence of facts. For without universals, of course, it is not possible to attain unto scientific knowledge, but the abstraction of them from singulars is a cause of the difficulties that ensue in regard of ideas. But some, as if it were necessary that if there are certain substances beside those that are cognizant by sense, and are in a state of flux, they should involve a separate subsistence, some, I say, were not in possession of other natures, but brought forward those that are denominated universals, so that it happens that both universals and singulars are nearly the same natures. This, to be sure, then, would itself amount to a certain essential difficulty in those statements that have been put forward above. Chapter 10. What it is, however, that is attended with doubt, both unto those who affirm the existence of ideas, and those who deny their existence, has likewise been observed previously in the doubts enumerated at the beginning of this treatise. Let us, however, at present make a repetition of the statements made there. For if indeed one will not admit that substances involve a separate subsistence, and that the singulars of entities subsist in that manner as they are declared to do, such a view of things will overturn substance, as we are disposed to allow. Yet, should one assume that there are substances possessing a separate subsistence, how will he establish the elements and the first principles of them? For, supposing them to subsist as a singular, and not as an universal, entities of this kind will be as numerous as elements, and the elements will not be things capable of being made objects of scientific knowledge. For, let the syllables in a word be granted to be as substances, and let the elements of them be the elements of substances. In such a case as this, it is therefore necessary that B, A, be one, and that each of the syllables should be one, if not in fact universally, and the same in species, yet each must be one in number, and this certain particular thing, and not equivocal, and further, they regard each one as the very thing itself. If syllables, however, be thus, so also will those things be of which syllables are composed. There will not accordingly be more than one letter A, nor will any of the rest of the elements be more than one, according to the very same mode of reasoning, in accordance with which neither is there any of the other syllables that is the same, but there is one in one word, and another in another. But certainly, if this be the case, there will not exist any different entities beside the elements, but entities will constitute elements merely. And further, neither will the elements be objects of scientific knowledge, for they are not universals, but scientific knowledge is conversant about universals as objects of investigation. Now, this is evident both from demonstrations and definitions. For a syllogism is not completed because this particular triangle has angles equal to 2 right angles, unless every triangle has angles equal to 2 right angles, nor because this man is an animal, unless every man is an animal. But undoubtedly, if first principles are universal, or, also, if substances that are compounds of these are universal, non-substance in such a case will be a thing that is antecedent to substance, for what is universal does not constitute substance, whereas the element and the first principle are universal. The element, however, and the first principle are things that are antecedent to those to which a first principle and an element belong, and therefore do all these consequences ensue reasonably when both certain philosophers constitute ideas as out of elements, and when, beside ideas and substances involving the same form, they may be of opinion that there is some one thing that has actually a separate subsistence. If, however, there is no hindrance, but that, as in the case of the elements of speech, there should be a multitude of the letters A and the letters B, and that A itself and B itself should be nothing beside the multitude of these, on this account at least there will be infinite similar syllables. But the fact that all scientific knowledge is conversant about what is universal, so that it is necessary that both the first principles of entities should be universal and not separable substances, this fact, I say, most especially, is attended with doubtfulness above any of the assertions already made. The assertion that is made is, notwithstanding, in a manner true, and in a manner it is not true. For scientific knowledge, as also the act of scientific cognition, is twofold, of which one subsists in capacity, but the other in energy. Capacity, then, I mean that which subsists as the matter of that which is universal and is indefinite, belongs to what is universal and indefinite. The energy, however, being definite, is likewise this certain particular thing belonging to this certain definite particular thing. But according to accident it is that the power of vision beholds universal colour, because this particular colour which it beholds is a colour, and what the grammarian speculates into as this particular letter A is a letter A, since if it be necessary that the first principle should be universal, it is also necessary that those things which subsist from these should be universal, as is shown in the instance of demonstrations. And if this be the case, there will be nothing that involves a separate subsistence, nor will there be in existence actual substance. It is evident, however, that in a manner scientific knowledge is conversant about what is universal as an object of its investigations, but that in a manner this is not the case. End of Book 12.